I think Ben Uri reflects immigrant communities' evolution and development within society. Here you had a situation where Ben Uri was founded in the Jewish ghetto in Whitechapel 100 years ago. The people, the community in that ghetto essentially had one ambition, probably over anything else outside the normal in terms of health and safety and family, and that was to get out of the ghetto, to progress, to give their families a better standard of living and a better quality of life. And in many ways, Ben Uri mirrored that, because no sooner had it been founded than it was actually looking west. It was looking to the west end of London to have its gallery, because it wanted to communicate their messages, their artist stories, to a wider audience. They didn't want to talk to themselves. And in many ways, I think that's exactly what immigrant communities do. They congregate, they arrive, they congregate, there is safety in numbers, and then they start to want to span out. Not isolationist, not assimilation, but integration, social integration. And if anything reflects Ben Uri, I think the word social integration does. Just imagine the second year of the First World War in Whitechapel, not in the leafy suburbs of Guildford or Harrogate, in the absolutely congested housing, living environment of Whitechapel, year 2 of World War I, and a Russian artist arrives from Paris into Whitechapel, and I guess said something like, "Hey guys, where do we artists exhibit?" And they went, "Exhibit? Are you crazy? We're in Whitechapel, we're in the East End, we're in the Jewish ghetto. We don't get out of here. The exhibitions are in the Royal Academy, they're in the West End." And one way or another, however he did it, Ben Uri was formed 1 year later in 1915, on the 1st of July. Ben Uri evolved from being an arts and craft movement. It was about the development of artistic skills and creative skills, but not in the traditional plastic arts, but it was in craft, because that's what Berson was, so it's inevitable. It was also very much molded in terms of philosophy on the Bezalel School of Art, which is why Ben Uri was called Ben Uri, because Ben Uri Bezalel, the craftsman of the Bible. So when Ben Uri started to evolve into this plastic arts, this visual arts society, this visual arts institution, what's fascinating about it is that it wasn't simply about the artist within its own milieu. It had a vision across Europe, it had a vision across continents. So by the time the 20s was coming and the 30s, it was already exhibiting artists from abroad. 1934, we exhibited Modigliani. We were the first museum in London to exhibit him. We showed Max Liebermann, we showed Les Uri, we showed Marc Chagall. These were not British artists. These are famous international artists that this tiny little institution, their vision took us there. And it's that, funnily enough, it's that formula, that wide vision of engagement that Ben Uri lost during the Second World War and post-World War II, for very good reasons. And then, I say quite openly and honestly, by accident regained in 2001 when I and my colleagues took Ben Uri over and started to reposition it in that format. We did not know that Ben Uri was almost founded on that international vision. And that's fascinating. We could have guessed, I suppose, that an institution that is exhibiting major international artists in the 1930s clearly did not have a narrow view of itself. But we didn't realize until we had employed our archivist this year and we really got to know with the detail of board minutes and catalogue writing that this was actually a fundamental philosophy. It was a means of operating. It was the only vision in time. And it's just fascinating that here we were thinking that we discovered America. In 1999, 2000, we spent so long analyzing, thinking, planning, working out what could the formula be for the next millennium that would allow Ben Uri to sustain itself and be of serious added value to London. And we came across and we came and concluded to this conclusion that we should be outward. We should be engaging other communities. We should be engaging other countries. And then we find that actually America we have not discovered. All we've done is gone back 70 years. But perhaps that means that we're right. I think the highlights of Ben Uri start off over 100 years ago. We are an immigrant community, but we're an old immigrant community. We've actually been in this country for 350 odd years. So unlike the Sudanese or the Bangladeshis or the Ugandan Asians, we're not modern and contemporary. We actually have a great deal of age to us, but we've been in and out. And the real 20th century, the modern contemporary migration started at the turn of the 20th century, where the Russians, and through the pogroms, through the Russian Pale of Settlement, basically Jews had two choices. They either stayed and were slaughtered, or they moved. And it's fascinating that so many came to Britain, because Britain has always had this remarkable, extraordinary liberalism of our mentality. We recognize people for what they are, not for any fears that currently are doing the rounds so thankfully unsuccessfully after the election, when actually Britain rejected that form of politics. But they came to Britain, and by the turn of the 20th century, in 1900, there were 300,000 Jews in London. Or in the United Kingdom, I should probably say. But there was 100,000 in Whitechapel. 100,000. And what's fascinating is that in 1906, when there was an exhibition of Jewish art in the Whitechapel Art Gallery, in November, December 1906, 150,000 people visited. 150,000 in 2 months. That would rank in the top 20 of exhibitions internationally today. The art newspaper produced the schedules. I keep saying it, 150,000 people visited. My guess is that 90% of that 150,000 was the 100,000 from Whitechapel, and the other 50,000, or let's say 40 out of the 50,000, from other parts of London. But it would probably, no doubt, be predominantly a Jewish audience. And that's interesting, because at that stage, here you had a minority community squeezed into a very, very small, tight geographical area where it was essential, not desirable, essential that people stuck together. And therefore, when one person goes to see something, other people follow. And when it's about their heritage, it's their football team, then of course people want to go and support. Part of the risks of social integration, part of the risk of economic progress and development is that people become more emancipated and therefore these ties loosen. Because I can tell you now, if we went back to the Whitechapel Art Gallery and we had an exhibition in November, December 2015 or 16, there would not be 150,000 people coming to it. And there certainly wouldn't be 100,000 members of the Jewish community coming to it. Because the need for tribalism, the need for association, the need for demonstrating pride is not as great.